Good afternoon. My name is Jordan Garner. I'm a computer science and management student here at Tech. Our sponsor for this afternoon's Impact session is the Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship. Our webcasting partner is Peach New Media, and our media partner is WABE 90.1 FM. I would like for you all to imagine a company that has raised over $6.5 million in funding for literacy and education programs around the world. Imagine a company with a commitment to the environment that includes keeping tens of millions of pounds of paper out of landfills and donating a percentage of every customer purchase to pay for renewable energy credits and reforestation projects. Imagine a company who believes the quality of their jobs, focusing around exceptional healthcare and benefits, is just as important as the business they do. Now imagine the CEO of this company whom, when faced with profitability issues, responds by first cutting his own salary by 20%. Better World Books is this company, and Mr. David Murphy, our distinguished guest today, is their CEO. Better World Books is a fast-growing online retailer of new and used books, established in 2003 by 3 Notre Dame graduates. By focusing on the intrinsic value of books, this revolutionary company is able to fund and support literacy initiatives on 4 continents, as well as donate books to classrooms and libraries where they are needed most, while maintaining a successful for-profit business. A winner of the 2008 Fast Company Social Capitalist Award, Better World Books is an innovative new social enterprise that meets all the demands of the triple bottom line, which includes economic, ecological, and social concerns. David Murphy currently serves as their Chief Executive Officer. After receiving an economics degree from the University of Notre Dame and an MBA from the Amos School of Business at Dartmouth College, David worked for 23 years in corporate finance, operations, and mergers and acquisitions with such firms as the International Paper Company, the First Boston Corporation, and Hutchinson SA. He also started several companies as well as served as CFO, COO, and CEO for both privately held and publicly traded firms in the manufacturing, healthcare, services, and technology sectors. In addition, Mr. Murphy is actively involved in several charitable organizations that focus on literacy and social enterprise. Now, please join me in giving a warm Georgia Tech welcome to our guest, Mr. David Murphy.
Thank you, guys. Can you hear me okay? Does that work? Does that work all right? Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for that great welcome. It's great to be here. I was told coming in, I was kind of kidding with Jordan about this, that I guess I'm the lead-off or the kickoff speaker, whatever, in your series. And I'm very appreciative to Terry to be here. I guess I said, whatever that sort of translates into in terms of, getting on base or whatever for your whole fall semester, I'll try to do my best. Make sure we kick this off well for all of you. What I want to try to do today is get to a Q&A piece of this, which we're going to do later. I've always found that when I'm with folks, undergrads, grad students, alum, whoever in the audience, that's, I think, where we learn a lot, both of us, in terms of the quality and the depth of the questions I'm sure that will come from you, and we want to make sure we kind of have that interchange. So I do want to do just a couple of things first. They say life is about choices, and one of the things I was thinking about was here we have a great audience in terms of, making choices every day, personal life, professional life. And, we want to kind of focus a little bit maybe on professional today in terms of the choices you'll make, today, tomorrow, your career, school, what you're studying, where you'll go from here. Not to put too much of the attention on myself, because I really want to talk more about our team and our company. And really what I'm very excited about to talk about, of course, is social enterprise and where that's going. A huge movement sort of sweeping the country right now that I'm anxious to get out in front of you, and again, invite your questions about it. Just a couple of things, I guess, about choices that I've made, and I thought I'll just share some of these briefly with you because they've essentially helped me get where I am today here. Doesn't mean they were the right choices or that there are choices that would work for everybody, but they sort of work for me in a way, and maybe there's something you can glean from that might prove interesting or helpful. So a couple of things, maybe 4 or 5 things that I think have kind of worked. One is, going back to probably where you are at this point, it was really a commitment to invest in education. So I was fortunate to get, undergrad and grad school, look for great schools. The fact that you're all here at a place like Tech is phenomenal. So, preaching to the choir a little bit there, but, it isn't just what you're learning in the books. Again, I've met tremendous people along the way. Kind of an interesting story about Notre Dame. I graduated from there a long time ago and sort of reconnected with the university back through this business. And who would have thought 20 years later or whatever it was that because of relationships I'd made and kept going all the way back to my undergraduate days, that it really resulted in what you're about to hear about the Better World book story. So education and, again, relationships with both students and professors. I would really encourage you to, the people that you're here with and learning from, no matter where you go, keep in touch with them. You just never, ever know what they're up to and where you might reconnect down the road. Second was really a commitment, at least for me, to get some early training at big companies. Now, it's kind of interesting sometimes when you come from an entrepreneurial perspective where you think, well, big companies are bad and they're slow and they're bureaucratic and all that. And there's certainly an amount of truth to that. But when you're coming out of school and you're looking for some really just great training, that worked for me. One with a large company that was the CEO had just come in from GE, so there's a lot of you are familiar with GE's reputation for executive management training, financial management, whatever you call it. GE is a great place for developing talent, and I was fortunate to get that in this international paper company. Also, I went to work for a large company that actually was based in France. It was a subsidiary of the Total Energy Group, so it was really fascinating to be on the state side of a European-based company and just the international exposure back and forth. Again, years later would come to serve me well. Third, I think, was a commitment I made to go to Wall Street. Again, I was fascinated with capital markets, corporate finance, M&A, what was going on. And while I didn't work on Wall Street for an extended period of time, it was enough to really sort of immerse myself in the day-to-day of how companies get funded, what's that all about, where's value created. Again, through the years, served me well. Also, I think working in different industries. Now, this isn't for everybody, but it's really worked well for me. I've been fortunate to work in healthcare, manufacturing, Wall Street, technology, big companies, small companies. So again, just sort of that richness and the diversity of the experience is something that, again, I treasure. Finally, too, I think the whole notion of being an entrepreneur. I was kind of a late blooming entrepreneur. I started my first company when I was 30. And have been involved with about 6 startups since that time, some of which were my own, some of which I sort of partnered with other people. I think the lesson there is that not everybody is creating Facebook in their dorm room when they're a freshman. There are lots of opportunities to start companies, and they'll come to you at different times of your life. So just be open and be ready for it if you think that's for you. And never stop learning along the way. And again, that's where some of those introductions and connections come back to really, really be fruitful for you. And then finally, I'd just share with you real quick, one of the things I think is important too is whatever you're doing in your career, stay connected in a way professionally that challenges you and gets you exposure to some other things going on. This could be professional associations, trade groups, things like that sort of take you out of the world that you're in, whatever that world is. In my case, it was kind of interesting. I love looking at business plans. I love to read them. I love to see what people are thinking, how creative they are, the innovation. And again, you might get 1 out of 100 that are worth funding and doing something with. But it's always amazing to be around that. And so for me, that was kind of the opportunity I took to re-engage back at Notre Dame when they started their business plan competition back in the year 2000. Put me in touch with, again, some professors, some of whom I'd known for years, some new ones. Put me in touch with a whole new group of alumni around this. And I know, of course, Georgia Tech, you have the same thing here. Just a great way to sort of stay involved, stay connected, stay on top of what is happening. All you have to do is read 4, 5, 6 business plans that might come from undergrads or grad students or alum, and you get a lot of richness in that experience. And that certainly served me well. And it's actually what has led me ultimately to be here, because Better World Books was a company that was formed by 3 Notre Dame grads, class of 2001. And it was totally almost by accident in a way that we all know. Sometimes a lot of great companies start that way. It wasn't necessarily a real honed business plan that somebody just wrote down on a piece of paper and said, let's go do this. What happened back in 2001 was we all know Jeff Bezos and we all know Amazon. And as Amazon was essentially building itself up, they made a fundamental shift in their strategy, which was really to allow third-party marketplaces to essentially sell wares on their infrastructure, if you will. When Amazon first started and they burned through a lot of cash to do this, a lot of what they wanted to do was actually own all the inventory. So again, Jeff Bezos started with books and media products, but you can imagine building out the distribution and putting all the money into the inventory was quite expensive. So at some point they shifted right around 2001 and said, okay, well, if you've got books in your garage and you want to sell them on Amazon, we'll be happy to accommodate that, and we'll take a toll, we'll take a fee to do that. And that led to just ultimately thousands and thousands of these third-party sellers to be able to sell their wares on Amazon. And Half.com, which eventually got acquired by eBay, was the same thing. And in fact, Half.com early on actually had much more of a, I think, a name and a recognition and a brand in college textbooks, which is really where we started. So the business basically started with 3 guys sitting around trying to figure some things out, and ultimately they wanted to help a local nonprofit in the South Bend, Mishawaka area, a company called, I should say a nonprofit called the Robinson Community Learning Center. Worked with a lot of the most at-risk communities in and around that area, and students were volunteering there quite a bit. They were looking to raise money. These guys kind of brainstormed and said, well, what if we actually sold books and raised money online and essentially gave some of the proceeds to a nonprofit. Now that experience actually started with just the 2 or 3 of them sitting around with their own textbooks and being fairly tech savvy and wanting money and needing money post-graduation and saying, gee, we got all these engineering books in the corner, what do we do with them? Oh, I hear you can sell them on Half.com or Amazon. Let's try that. First book goes out, 65 bucks, whatever it is. Wow, that's pretty cool. So they sold every book they had and figured out how to do that, and then decided, okay, hey, Notre Dame's right down the street. What if we ran a book drive there? And they did. They got 2,000 books or whatever. Spent the summer putting it online. And again, when they collected those books from students, they said, look, this isn't for us. We're actually doing it to benefit this nonprofit that everybody knew. So there's sort of instant brand recognition of who this group was in the community. So that's kind of how it started. Like I said, I think in the first month or 2 after they started, this would have been the fall of 2002. They sold like $25,000 worth of books in 4 weeks, 5 weeks, something like that, and walked down the street to the nonprofit, said, here's a check for about half of that. They kept the rest and just kind of reinvested in the business. And then all of a sudden it kind of clicked in and said, what if we did this at, went down the street to Purdue or IU or Michigan State or U of M or whatever. They kind of kept it, central to the Midwest, and that's kind of how it started. Then, at that point, they actually wrote it down on paper, submitted it in the business plan competition, and that's where I, as just a random judge or a mentor, actually got the plan, read it, gave some comments back, and then, as I say, the rest is kind of history, so that's how the whole introduction worked. I mentored the group for probably close to 1.5 years, and then I officially became CEO a little over 5 years ago. So, again, that's really just to touch on a little bit of my experience, but I think what's really exciting to talk about today, again, is where is social enterprise? When I got out of school, if you really wanted to pursue anything that was going to make a difference in the world, whether that was literacy, the environment, any sort of social justice kind of initiative or endeavor, your choices were pretty stark. You basically said, I'm going to go work for a nonprofit. In many cases that was, gee, we'd love to have you, but we can't afford you. So you're either volunteering your time. Now imagine this is right after college, right? So you got student loans. You're trying to figure out your career. And really what was tough was your heart and your head may have been sort of pointed in that direction, but you were almost forced sometimes to go a different direction. Because there just really weren't that many opportunities. And it wasn't just the money. I think all of you would agree that whatever you choose to do, you want to be challenged. If you're in engineering or technology or marketing or finance, whatever it is, you want to come out of school and you want to work with really, really good people, sharp people that are going to challenge you, people that are going to teach you, and you want those mentors as you grow in your career. And again, back in those days, the tough part was even if you were fortunate enough to go work at some of these agencies or some of these groups, no matter how good they were trying to do, a lot of times, again, I know a lot of people who went through this, they just end up quitting because they were so frustrated professionally. They were getting sort of second and third tier exposure, and there was no money in the budget, and they're using computers or technology that are 5 years old, and it was just, at some point you just have to say, I'm not going to sacrifice my professional career just for that. What's really exciting, I think, and again, we'll touch on it here today, is where that's all gone in the last 20, 25 years. You now have schools, preeminent schools like Georgia Tech, that are all teaching social entrepreneurship. It wasn't even on the syllabus, 5 years ago or 6 years ago. I was saying at the also you're talking with Terry and a few others that next week I'll be in San Francisco at a conference called SOCAP, and it stands for Social Capitalism. And they just started this conference a year ago. I think last year they hoped to get 200 or 300 professionals to come, and they ended up with about 650. I think this year they were trying to make sure they got as many, especially with the economy the way it is. And I think now they're oversubscribed at something north of 800 people. These are people coming together who are people that are forming venture funds, people that are putting capital to work in different situations, for-profit models, non-profit models, hybrid models. And let's face it, the economy and what's happened in the last 15 months or so has forced a lot of this to sort of step back and say, if you are somebody, and this is what's interesting, is some of the people that are showing up at this are fund managers, money managers, private equity people, private office people, people that are controlling tens of millions of dollars where to put it. So they're asking themselves questions now. Well, do I just, on behalf of my client, do I put it in the S&P 500? Gee, that hasn't done so well in the last year or so. What is this new social capitalism model? And actually, are there opportunities to invest in companies that do good and also can provide superior financial returns in the end, too? So a lot of really interesting things going on there. And I think it's a really, really exciting time for any of you that might have even an inkling of interest in really what social enterprise is and where you could take it in your career. Even if it's just purely academic at this point, there's really, there's great opportunities to learn. And then, again, as you graduate and move on, I think there'll be really interesting opportunities for all of you to jump in kind of where you want and when you want. So, Better World Books. Let's talk a little bit about this, again, more in the context of what's possible. If I'd have been, somebody walked up to me 5 years ago and said, could this happen? I would have said, well, maybe. But, like any venture you start, it's a lot of hope, a lot of dream, a lot of hard work, a lot of sweat equity. But it's really amazing to see what has come together. And again, I just stand up here representing about 285 people who have made it happen. So we're going to walk through this a little bit just so you make sure you understand kind of the business, the scale, the model, how it sort of works. And then we'll, again, have plenty of time, hopefully, for Q&A when we're finished. All right. So the title of this is, again, Building to Scale and Delivering on Triple Bottom Line Results. Well, triple bottom line, everybody, people use that a lot these days. When we say that, we're typically meaning environment. We're meaning some sort of social impact, whether in our case that's literacy. That's really what we're all about. We'll talk about that. And then sort of the financial piece. Think of the financial stakeholders you still have in terms of delivering on capital, especially capital that's been invested or if it's been invested from the outside. I could actually add a fourth, which is really employees and community that we pay a lot of attention to, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Let me make a note on this too. One of the things that's really beginning to be interesting in the social enterprise space is the notion of scale. There's a lot of companies in this space that start off and they're very small. They're t-shirt companies and they're cafes and doing great work and so forth. But actually, one of the things that I look for a lot, and we have this discussion all the time, sort of in the social enterprise space, is scale. How do you ultimately get some of these really bigger companies to have this kind of an impact as time goes on? So this is basically our mission. We're a global bookstore that harnesses the value of books to bring literacy and opportunity to people around the world. So note, again, I talked at the beginning about choices. So this is a choice for us. We basically set this entire business on a model that says, when you give us a book, if we sell that book, there is a defined percentage of the sale price of that book that's going to a nonprofit. There are no ifs, ands, or buts about that. It's not about, gee, let's see at the end of the year how much money we've made. If we've got some profit, we'll give some left over. This is baked into the business model, and that's important because, if you're not careful about how you do this, you'll go broke. Imagine that if, every book I sell, if it's, okay, this is going off, you're literally creating a liability for the company. So you have to be very, very careful about how you set this. But when we talk about built-in cost of doing good, that's what we mean. Now, this happens to be our business model. There's others that are similar, but Again, this isn't sort of a nice, mushy, fuzzy thing that says at the end of the year we give a little away. This is a very, very different kind of model. Now, the challenge, and I'm not going to read all these, but again, I think these are probably statistics maybe you've seen before. 1/7 of the planet's population basically is illiterate. 2/3 of those are women. Now, think about that from the impact of women. So, most of us, and there's actually been research on this, that children will develop mostly with the relationship, especially in the developing world, with their mother. So, if you've got 800, 900 million illiterate people, say 500, 600 million of those are women. If every one of those women is having, on average, even 2 children, 3 children, think about what that really sort of means for the next generation in terms of sort of where your impact's going to be with regard to literacy. You can see a number of stats here on different countries or different, actually different continents. We are actually actively work on 4 of these continents, all 4 of the ones that are mentioned here. One that I think kind of surprises people here is in the U.S. So over 40 million people functionally illiterate in our own country, which oftentimes doesn't get a lot of attention. Locally here in Georgia, and of course Terry will recognize this, a lot of this comes from some statistics that have been gleaned from work that we're doing at the Ferst Foundation. I know Robin's going to be a speaker later here. Again, a couple of these come out to sort of jump out at you in terms of, only 28% of Georgia 4th graders read at or above proficiency. And look at the, some of the costs. So for just the pure economic cost to both the city and the state, into the billions of dollars a year, simply because we don't have a literate workforce. Our business model, again, is really pretty straightforward. And I think when I talked earlier about reading business plans, understanding new opportunities, one thing I've found that has always been true is that some of the best ideas are actually quite simple. Now, they may have very complex technology and tools underlying what they're trying to do, but the business problem they're trying to solve is usually pretty simple. It's like you can read it and you get it. You don't have to read the executive summary 8 times to figure out what are they trying to do, how does this work, how do I connect the dots. So what we do is we started off on colleges and college campuses basically running these book drives. So it was basically saying, gee, when you're finished with your books, this is something near and dear to all of your hearts, right? You go to the bookstore to sell it back, and you're going to get a price, or there's other people that will buy it. But a lot of times there's books left over. You might have 6 books, 8 books, and maybe only 4 or 5 of them get bought. What do you do with the rest? And unfortunately, a lot of those books basically end up in the trash, where they are not recycled. They're actually thrown in a landfill because of the hard covers. And that's where we started. We said, well, gee, if we could take advantage of what we call the low-value books, could we come up with a business model in terms of having the technology and the logistics infrastructure behind that to actually make money by taking those books in, processing, putting them online, selling them with again, a defined percentage going to a partner, a nonprofit partner. That's how we started, college campuses. We then moved to libraries. Libraries started to call us, and we began to talk to certain libraries who said, gee, I'm weeding books off my shelf. You think about a typical library, they've got to turn their inventory too. What do they do with the books? Well, we started to hear all kinds of horror stories about librarians, some of which even in the Atlanta community, who are saying, I'm throwing books in the dumpster. And I've even heard them tell me personally, I do it in the middle of the night so no one will see me. Because if the public knew what I was doing with community property, books, imagine throwing books in the trash. But they have no other way to get rid of them until we came along. So what we did is we set up a consignment model, and we said, give us your books. We'll tell you which books there are certain books we don't want. We don't want certain types of periodicals, and we don't need, condensed Reader's Digest, and we don't need, World Book encyclopedias from 20 years ago and things like that. But basically, with guidelines that we can give around, hey, this might have value online, give us the books. And we pay, we give them the boxes, we pay for the freight, we get them up to our warehouse in Indiana, we sell those, and when we sell them again, there's a defined percentage that goes to the library. And true to our social mission, there's a defined percentage that goes to a nonprofit that they pick. They either pick one of our big nonprofits, which I'll talk about in a minute, or they pick somebody that's local. Great example, one of our first clients was right here in Atlanta, Gwinnett Public Library System. And Gwinnett County chose to benefit a nonprofit that actually is at work up in the sort of northeast corner of the state, up in the mountains. Very poor, very rural. And every 90 days, we're cutting a check to Gwinnett public library system, and we're cutting a check to this nonprofit that they're supporting. We then began to take on, we got calls from, corporations that wanted to run corporate book drives, community book drives. Or actually, the community piece is sort of a third leg of the stool that we're standing on now, which we're really trying to push forward. So in addition to college campuses and libraries, we're now really sort of rolling out a community-based model that says, hey, we want your books that are in your basement, in your attic, in your garage. We've got to figure out a way to get them and monetize that. And again, have those support a nonprofit that's in your local community. Again, all books are sold online with the partner defined. If we can't sell the book, the next best thing is, could we give the book away? Could we donate it? We have donated about 1.5 million books, most of those to Africa, most of those college textbooks. So you think about a chemistry course you're taking with a nice brand new 2009 copyright. If we've got a 2006 or 2005 copyright, it may not have as much value left in the United States because it's already a few editions behind. But that's a great, great chemistry book to be teaching, to be used in places like Africa for sure. And then finally, if the book is not capable of being sold or donated, we at least recycle it. So our mantra is, you give us a book, 3 things are going to happen to it, and they're all good, right? We sell it and generate cash, we donate it, or we basically make sure we recycle it. We've handpicked recyclers who have the equipment necessary to take those covers off, and get to the pulp and get to the paper and turn it into napkins and paper towel and those kinds of things. So again, I've touched on some of this. There's a shot of the community center, the first community center we ran. And from a scale perspective, we're now at about 1,800 colleges and universities across the country, across North America actually, because we have a number in Canada that we work with. The library, what we call the donations and discard program, started in 2004. We're now up to about the same number, 1,800 public and academic libraries in the US and Canada. As we've kind of evolved, we started to move into thrift stores. So for example, you can go to Salvation Army, Goodwill. They will give you they have a ton of books, as you might imagine. We usually pay for those books by the pound. They don't just sort of give them to us. And that's fine. We're taking them off their hands, and again, we can monetize them. We might pay 4 or 5 cents a pound plus the shipping. Again, corporate and community drives. I'm just giving you a little bit of a timeline here. And this one here is really worth mentioning. One of the things that we identified clearly, very early on was how critical technology is to our business. I mean, it just doesn't exist without it. So we basically had to, from the very beginning, develop our own proprietary software. There was nothing you could sort of go to on the store and pick something off the shelf and say, how do you sell, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of used books online? How do you get it in a warehouse, keep track of it? Oh yeah, and what about the part about the nonprofit? How do you make sure every book's attached to a nonprofit so you know how to keep all that? I mean, if you really sort of take this out into and go kind of deep with it, it's very, very complicated. Let alone, how do you price the books, right? So as it mentions up here, today we're selling books on 21 marketplaces online. Each of those marketplaces are different in a way in terms of what may dictate your pricing strategy. So I could have that, go back to that chemistry textbook. I might sell it at one price on Amazon, another price on Half, another price on barnesandnoble.com, another price on eBay. And we're up to about 2.7 million used books up in our warehouse. And that's a lot of books to be pricing, literally sometimes, by the hour. The other key thing we did in late 06, early 07 is we said we want to build our own brand. So we created betterworldbooks.com. Hopefully one of my goals today is to turn you into customers when you leave. So we want you to check out the site. But really we thought, hey, we've got something here in terms of how we get books and both also how we sell books that's very unique. And we feel that it's sort of, it's coinciding here when I was talking earlier about social enterprise with kind of this movement that say, hey, consumers they're not dumb. They want to make good decisions, good value decisions, save money. On top of that, I think more and more people are saying, I want to exercise my purchasing power in a responsible way. Whether that's backing green companies, backing socially responsible companies, put the two together, whatever you want to call it. It's that discretionary purchasing power and where you aim that's critical to our business model, and we think we're sort of beginning to see more and more evidence that people are really gravitating to Better World Books for some of those reasons. Just a shot of the site. Obviously, this is back to school time, so it was obviously a big push on our part to try to move a lot of textbooks over the past couple of weeks. Maybe we've even got some customers in the room. I don't know. I'm not going to get into every stat here, but again, I'm trying to give you a sense of scale. So as we build the brand at betterworldbooks.com, just sort of year over year, some things that stick out. So we're clearly growing revenue pretty well, site visits, conversion rates. You can see here a little bit of the power of the social media. So whether it's Twitter, Facebook, we're up to a little over 16,000 Facebook fans now. I invite you guys to join, by the way. But really, this is just how you build a brand. You can see the second line, betterworldbooks.com now about 22% of our total revenue. We actually hope to grow that eventually up to at least half of the company's revenue as we build brand. And again, we're building a brand not just for, hey, it's a great bookstore, but it's really a different place to shop too, again, in terms of where you want to commit your dollars and feel good about what you're doing in your purchasing decisions. So a few marketplace metrics. We're one of the top 5 sellers on Amazon of used books. Again, we've acquired over 25 million books in this 5 to 6 year company history. You can see there how many customers, how many total books sold on the marketplaces. Sort of an eBay reference there in terms of most feedbacks, number 60 in the world. So again, just to give you a sense of scale and where this has come from literally an idea 5 or 6 years ago. Again, some scale kinds of metrics for you. So I mentioned earlier about 282 people with some of those being part-time. We have 3 footprints. So our corporate headquarters is actually up here in Alpharetta, about 36 people or so. The big distribution center in Mishawaka, Indiana. And we actually went live about a year ago in Edinburgh, Scotland with Better World Books UK. And we're actually real excited about what they're doing. It's just really the same model. They're starting to actually reach out to a lot of the UK libraries and campuses as well in sort of that intake model. Right now we sell our UK inventory up on 3 or 4 websites, not all 21. Eventually we want to have our own branded website with a UK, clearly a UK look and feel and currency to it so that you're actually buying books over there in pounds, and we do all the currency stuff on the back end. Revenue, we're sort of 80x in 6 years, so we hope to, in our current fiscal year, top out a little bit north of $40 million. Again, I'm not going to get into all these, but again, this is just, I want to make a point here, I guess, with some of this. Sometimes, again, people sit back and they think social enterprise, and that just means different things to different people. In my experience, sometimes when I tell people that, they kind of give you this, oh, isn't that nice? Isn't that sweet? Isn't that so cool? That's cool, you're helping the world. And it's kind of, in a way, it's frankly sometimes condescending. And it's almost as if to say, well, whatever you're doing is great, but, it's not real. It's not a real business. It's not, it's whether people define that by technology or sophistication of some sort. I think sometimes when you kind of look at something like this, we're, whether it's because we can add 5,000 books in an hour or processing over 300,000 books a week. We've spent this money on technology. It's amazing software, and again, all homegrown. Goes back to certainly the early talent and genius of the founders, and some of them very, very tech savvy, but also smart enough to know how to go out and outsource key components of it. We've actually had a lot of our actual hard coding of the software done by a firm in Russia for the last 5 or 6 years that we outsourced to way back in 2002 on Elance, and they've been with us ever since. But you have to get into very sophisticated stuff in logistics and technology, your database, all of this to really make sure this thing runs and scales and eventually has the kind of impact on our mission that we want it to have. And you can see the social profit clearly. And now almost, actually at about $7 million now on what we call social profit. And now we're selling somewhere between 8,000 and 12,000 books a day, non-peak. I just came back from a warehouse yesterday. We're at this very, very busy time of our year, which we call rush. And we're clearly, we're selling north of 20,000 books a day. Social impact. So these are our partners. We talk about our 5 major partners. World Fund, which is basically based in New York City. It's doing all kinds of great work in Latin America. Books for Africa, on the ground in Africa. By the way, all of these have different models. They're not all the same in terms of how they deliver literacy impact. Room to Read, for example, based in San Francisco, founded by John Wood, a former Microsoft executive. Great NGO working around the world. He's now moved from, John started in Asia, Paul, Cambodia, Laos, Vietnam, Sri Lanka, India. He's now moved into South Africa, into Zambia, and I think they're about to open in Rwanda later this year. Different model than Books for Africa, which is all about getting books to children and to college students in Africa. National Center for Family Literacy, kind of our domestic partner. They're based in Louisville, Kentucky. They work in something like 6,000 communities across the United States. Invisible Children, we picked them up last year as a partner based in San Diego. Very committed to what's going on in northern Uganda in terms of the Invisible Children references to lost soldiers, boys being kidnapped by Joseph Kony, who's a crazy, crazy guy, and taking these young boys and, turning them into soldiers, and a lot of times they do come back, the ones that survive. And how do you bring them back into society? How do you get them into school? How do you get them kind of essentially on their feet? And really bring education to that part of the world. Local and regional nonprofit partners, these are just a few that we work with. Again, in New York Public Library, Prison Book Program in Boston, which is all about obviously getting books to people that are incarcerated. And New Orleans Public Library Foundation, that was a great example of working with NCFL when Katrina hit. NCFL was actually already on the ground in New Orleans, so we just sort of partnered with them. We started asking for book donations. We just got flooded. People all over the country. Actually, we got too many books. We had to tell them to stop for a while. Again, process those books, sell them, and I think the last time I checked, we'd raised about $130,000 for New Orleans Public Library. So we're actively working on 4 continents with over 80 nonprofit partners. So you saw the major 5. The others are really the ones that are really being attached to those library partners I talked about earlier. When I made the reference, say, to Gwinnett. So Gwinnett's supporting a nonprofit up in Northeast Georgia. They'd be one of those 80. Some of the numbers, again, on 6.5 million, which is now actually about 7. Actually, 1.4 million books. I mentioned the number here for campus groups. So for anybody that has run a book drive for us on a college campus, we actually use it as a fundraiser. Anybody's interested. We actually pay the student groups 50 cents per what we call accepted book. And a number of those have actually taken their money and turned it right around and said, we want to help pay for a shipment of books to Africa, or we want to use it in this way or this way. So while not all of that sort of dovetails directly into social impact, some of it certainly has. And it's also been a great fundraiser for all these campuses. This is just a clip. It's a video clip of Invisible Children. I mentioned them as our newest partner. I thought I'd just play this real quick. Just so you get a little sense of, this was a partnership we rolled out with them about in Uganda. we just rolled that out last summer. Invisible Children, the way they work is they go into like 1,100 high schools around the country. They actually set this up to be sort of a community-based book drive. We thought going into it, you see the reference to the world's biggest book drive. We actually should have contacted the Guinness World Book of Records or whatever, but we thought, if we could get 500,000 books, this would be awesome. And we actually ended up with a little over 2 million books that really from the time we said go in probably July or August of last year, those books were actually in our warehouse by February. What's happened, of course, now is we have sold a lot of those books, and the funding now is back to Israel. So environmentally, there was a reference certainly to, again, the triple bottom line. So again, it's what you choose to do. So in our case, we've chosen a business model here that is also says the environment is absolutely critical, starting with obviously sort of one of our core values, which is reuse, 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 and then recycle. So we have a whole warehouse, a whole operation that's committed to how much can we reuse material. The reference there to 13.6 million books diverted from landfills. We're now actually working with an independent consultant who's come in and sort of verifying that you can actually convert that to different environmental metrics, which we keep track of. And by the way, this goes to board level. So every time we have a board meeting and every time we're sort of reporting on a quarterly or annual basis, it isn't just how the company's doing financially. These are statistics that we share with our board and with our stakeholders. Even our shelves. We've gone out to libraries who are going to pitch. In some cases, we actually pulled the shelves out of these dumpsters that the libraries were throwing away and brought them into the warehouse and used them. And then again, if you buy a book from our site, one of the things we do is we try to offset the carbon footprint for the shipping of the book to you. There's a formula you use for that, so it actually tacks on maybe 2, 3, 4, 5 cents to the price of your book at the end. We work with carbonfund.org to actually sort of offset that with a credit. Our goal is to actually have the entire operation, everything we do, carbon neutral. That's going to take us a little bit of time. Employees, we talk about this again when I mentioned sort of the reference to a fourth bottom line. This would be it. How you treat your people. We've always been very much from the very beginning focused on widespread employee ownership. So we're always pleased to report that over 90, it's actually probably closer to 95% of all full-time employees have stock options in the company. Affordable health care, benefits. There was a reference, I think, made at the beginning about cutting salary. Yeah, when we got to late January last year and the economy was crazy, we had to make some cuts. We weren't totally immune from that. We sort of believed in the top-down approach. The nice part about that is we made it what we hoped to be a temporary cut for everybody, and I'm happy to report that about a month ago we announced that for everybody but the executive team, all the salaries have been fully restored, which was a great day. Just the revenue piece again, we've been doubling about every 2 years. We should do, we're in fiscal 10 right now, starting July 1st. We hope to be north of 40 million, and we've been, this reference to currently EBITDA positive is really sort of an operating cash flow barometer. We've been operating cash flow positive for every month so far in calendar year 2009. B Corporation, again, interesting when we talk about choice. B Corporation is a community put together by some people who believe that ultimately there can be a new kind of corporation in this country. This is a movement. Check out their website. It's really pretty fascinating what they're trying to do, but it's essentially saying, when you incorporate as a company, you can be a C Corp, an S Corp. There's a legal structure. There's a tax code that supports that. Long term, what they want to do is actually have a tax code and a legal infrastructure that says you can elect to be a B Corp. B standing for public benefit. So this is where you're actually saying it isn't just about financial return to shareholders. It's about balance. So you have multiple stakeholder groups, your employees, your community, the environment, and you hold yourself accountable at a board level and a fiduciary responsibility to balance that. Right? We were one of the founding members of B Corp back in the fall of 2007. I think we were number 20 or something, and now it's up over 200 companies with over $1 billion of collective revenue, and they're really moving this forward. Wouldn't surprise me if in the next few years, again, you're going to just see more and more reference to this. This has really got a lot of momentum. Really what it does here, which is kind of interesting, it actually says if you really want to be a B Corp, you have to change your articles of incorporation. So in our case, we're a C corporation here in Georgia. We actually we went to our board and we said, we're making this change because If you don't, basically the way it works is you are almost de facto have a fiduciary responsibility only to your financial shareholders. So I could, frankly, be in a situation where I could have an investor come to me and say, hey, you're not giving enough money to the shareholders, you're giving too much to those invisible children people, or you're spending too much on recyclable materials in your packaging. Whatever it may be, they're going to say, it's all about financial return. So now we say, no, it's not. And if you really want some teeth in it, come and check our articles of incorporation. We've taken that step as a board, and that's pretty powerful. And again, we can build collective voice through the power of a unifying brand. So it's all about B Corp. So more and more I go out and I talk to people, and people saying, yeah, are you a B Corp? Or I'm hearing about B Corp. You can go out and you can go to their website and sort of check out what they're doing and who's becoming involved. It's a great part of the whole social enterprise movement. With that, there's I guess a picture of all of us saying thank you for the opportunity to be here with you today on sort of the formal part of the presentation. But as I said at the outset, I'd love to get into some Q&A and just have at it in terms of what's on your mind with regard to any of what we've talked about, whether it's federal books, the social enterprise movement, anything is fair game here. So, and I think the way we're going to do this is, if you raise your hand, I'll call you, and I think there's some microphones that they'll come around and pass out. So, anybody want to start off with a question?
Any questions?
Yeah, two down in front here. So.
I didn't get the cheap sheets. Well, firstly, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And do you expect to branch out from just books, maybe following this business model in another aspect?
Yeah, it's a great question. The five-year question comes up all the time, and man, it's in a way it's kind of daunting to answer that, just because of the speed at which things are moving. I think we see ourselves continue to really grow and scale. We believe that there is a lot of opportunity here in what I'll sort of initially carve out as sort of the English-speaking world. So does Betterwell Books have a presence the way it should in Canada, in the UK, in Australia, in New Zealand, India, where we think there's an advantage to where we say, because again, most of the books you see in that picture, they're all English books. So we get requests sometimes from Latin America saying, do you have Spanish books? We say we don't. But I think there's a lot of ground for us to cover internationally and grow and scale. I think as a metric, we think our business will be at least 2 to 3 times its current size within 3 or 4 years. So again, there's a lot of growth in that. And by the way, let me put that in sort of context for you, because if you look around at what's happening in this economy, look at retailing, okay, just in general. Ask any retailer that will tell you this is the worst retailing environment since the Great Depression, and you saw some of the growth numbers here. Book retailing is going through a huge change. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Borders, three publicly traded companies in the space, what I call the brick and mortar model. You guys have one right downstairs. Have been hurting, Sales contracting, losses instead of profits, employees being laid off. And then you read about look at Amazon, and look at even in our little world what's happening. So, the strategic shift to more online, I think we're in the right space. I think we're in the right space with the kind of product, used books, cheaper. We like to say sort of cheap and cheerful, the Betterwell Books, the cheerful part sort of talking about the mission and the message. And our sales have never been stronger today, or at least recently, through all of this, because I think again, it's the right place in the market. But I see more international expansion. I see more opportunities for us to build relationships with our customers on our own brand that lead them to come to us not just for used books but for new books. So we don't warehouse new books, but we have relationships with distributors, and we want to be a complete bookstore. The second part of your question about do we branch out from books? Maybe. The answer there is that there's a lot we still think is there with books, and we want to really be really careful here that we're on the one hand innovative enough to look beyond just books, but at the same time sort of have the discipline that says we got a long way to go with books. And before we get diverted, before we get management's time and attention and focus away from that, we want to be really careful. So I think for the short term, whether that's all the way out to 5 years or not, it's hard to say. But I would say at least in the next couple years, I'd see us sticking absolutely with books. Yes?
What organizations do you work with in Africa to make sure that the books and the funds get to where they need to be?
Well, there's actually 3 answers to that are all based on our 3 partners. So let's start with, you saw the video on Invisible Children. Invisible Children actually has African employees in northern Uganda. So, and the folks from San Diego are going back and forth all the time, checking in with them. So you saw, even on the film, you saw, building schools. I think they built 11 schools. I believe they have, forget the exact number, but I think it's a couple of hundred people on scholarship. So very hands-on in their own world. That's a world that they control. They don't farm that out to anybody. Room to Read, which is in South Africa and Zambia and going to Rwanda, their model is a lot similar. In some respects, it's similar to almost a Habitat for Humanity approach. So they come in, again, they hire on-the-ground people. So they have a staff in San Francisco, but if they're in, say, South Africa, they have South Africans that are there. They go into communities and they will partner with the community to where the community has to put something into it. Now, maybe that's just the labor. But when they're building schools, libraries, computer labs, it's the local people that are doing it. And they're taking a vested interest and so forth. One of the things we've done, again, I go back to my comments at the beginning, about choices. We've chosen to partner with top-notch NGOs. These are people that are, and again, these are sort of not your father's nonprofits. I mean, John Wood at NGO, at Room to Read, his goal is to have more libraries created in the developing world than there are Starbucks. I mean, and he's a Microsoft former exec, and he's pushing it, and he's metric-driven. Most of our partners are very open, and we're open with them about metrics. We share all kinds of stuff back and forth. Books for Africa, which is getting books over to Africa, they work with local NGOs, churches, Rotary groups, about anybody who can essentially put the money up for the shipment of the books. So their business model is, we'll get the books over here, but we need the money to ship it. And then we need you to make sure they're in the schools, make sure they're distributed, and again, get accounting and metrics and reporting back on that. So all of them are, 4 or 5 star, Charity Navigator, very open with their books. I've actually, some of us, not just me, but myself, my team, we travel. We've been to Brazil with World Fund. We've been to Cambodia with Room to Read. I've been to Africa twice with their partners. And, part of it's just seeing it for yourself, too.
I was wondering, have you considered electronic books, since that's coming on the scene, and how that might affect your business model, especially in the West or for certain types of books?
Great question, and one we're getting a lot these days, because you're all reading about electronic books, the Kindles, Google's partnership with Sony. I mean, it's, the world more and more, take Google's digitization effort, right, to literally get every printed book, digitized. So we know it's coming. I think it's a question of where we'll see it first. And also, I think a lot has to do with understanding where it looks like it's going, but also not panicking about it, right? So, I've heard people come up to me and go, your business is going to be, you're going to be out of business in 2 years, because everything's going to be electronic, right? You have all grown up with a mouse in your hand. You're all very tech savvy. So, you're all going to want electronic books and nothing else. So it's been interesting, because there's been some research on that, and it's interesting so far, and I'm not saying this will stay this way, but so far, when they've actually sat down with college students, even high school students, and watched the way they learn, watched the way they read, it's interesting, because they can be the most tech savvy people in the world, but they kind of still like their book. Now that's, again, not going to be true for everybody, and that will change. The tools will get better. The tools will get better. We know that. So, if our goal is an online bookstore to serve our customers, at some point do we offer ebooks as part of our solution? So you come to Better World Books, one-stop shop. Get new, get used, get ebook. That is something you can serve up to your clients. I think that the days, there's still, you can look at the numbers. There's a couple 100,000 books published annually in this country still. The book industry itself is somewhere between 25 and 30 billion. So even if it's slowing down and contracting, it's kind of like, well, who are the winners and who are the losers in that? So even if it was flat and wasn't really growing, are the brick and mortars the one that are really starting to go away, and are the online people coming up? So can we still build a very healthy, very positive business model around the printed piece that's left, which maybe in some cases is more and more used. And it's interesting, the last part of your comment about in the West, because as the Kindle and the electronic devices get better and there is more penetration with ebooks, clearly that's going to start here first. But does that mean it's, how quickly will it get to some of the parts of the developing world where maybe then, a few years out, we've got more of a footprint? So we've actually looked and envisioned, could Betterwell Books actually be on the ground in other parts of the world, both collecting books and selling books in its own sort of way that might even include some physical brick and mortar, partnering with NGOs on the ground, where they're going to be years and years away from, having a Kindle in their hand, right? So part of it's going to be how we respond to that internationally. Part of it's going to respond, how do we respond to it on our site? And then also really watching very carefully to see, do we start to see the supply of used books start to slow? And I'm not so sure we will in the next couple of years, but eventually it will happen.
All right. So I have a quick two-part question.
Sure.
What is the greatest risk of running your business? And if it's not the greatest risk, how risky is it in setting what percentage you give away to the charities and whatnot?
Right. Well, the risky part, let me come at it from both the way you asked it, both two parts. The risky part for the second part of your question, in terms of how we set that number, what we've always challenged ourselves to do is to set the number as high as we can without going broke. And trust me, in full disclosure, we've come close a few times. I mean, it's hard enough to start up any business. And that part of the model that was always, wanting to do the most but being careful, there's a few times where we got right up against it. I mean, I can tell you, sitting in meeting with bankers, where they basically said, you're losing money, we're going to pull the loan, unless you, take the money away from the nonprofits, because we have it as a liability on our balance sheet. And those were some tough moments. That's where you're kind of really looking in the mirror and saying, okay, how real is this whole social enterprise thing, And we had to tell the bank, if you're going to do that, you're going to do that, but we're not changing it. Now, we did get smart and go to our nonprofits and say, maybe going forward, we need to adjust the percentage a little bit to make sure we're getting balance. But we've never gone back and sort of pulled it back, or from money that was already committed. So I think we challenge ourselves to make sure it's as big, because we don't want to be one of these companies that at the end of the day is, we do all this and we say we've given $100,000 to literacy. We're at $7 million, and we think over the next couple of years that number should be double, triple that. I mean, we're really, really talking about making serious impact here. So we challenge ourselves all the time to say, can we tweak it up? Now, where does it come from? Well, can we lower shipping costs? Can we get new deals with UPS, with DHL? How are we shipping books internationally? Can we direct inject into other warehouses to get it out, out to our customers cheaper? So it's all about that balance piece, because when you're actually looking at your P&L and you're looking at your costs, that's the cost of running the business, and we don't want to cut it. We want to figure out a way to actually expand it. The first part of your question about risk and so forth, again, I think it kind of goes back to the question of the macro trends right now on what is going to happen with electronic books. Especially, I would say my biggest concern about that is in the college textbook market. Because Kindle's already announced they've already announced a deal with a few colleges. Are we in a world where 3, 4, 5 years from now you come to school first day, just like today you have a laptop, right? Well, you walk in 5 years from now and you don't get any books. Here's your reading device, whether that's a Kindle or some other electronic application. So what does that do to our supply of textbooks long term? So I think at a sort of a strategic level, I think that's where we've got our eyes focused, and making sure that at the end of the day we can keep the supply of books coming that we need to run a great enterprise.
We have time for one last question.
One of your slides said there was no outside equity until 2008.
Yes.
Could you talk about what happened there, and how might that process be different from a typical profit-driven company?
Sure. Great question. I'm actually glad it came up. Yeah, well, of course, the reference was to bootstrap. So, different entrepreneurial ventures require different capital structures. And again, there's no right or wrong way. It's just kind of what works for you. The typical approach is you get a great idea, especially if you're out in Silicon Valley. great idea, and it's pre-revenue, but it's going to change the world. And you go off to meet with some VCs, and the next thing you know, they write you a check for $10 million or $20 million and say, go. And then the next thing you're doing, you're hiring people, and you're taking this idea to market. We really did it sort of differently. We basically said, hey, we got an idea, and we were fortunate that our business model, in a way, lent itself to like real revenue pretty quickly. That being said, we had our gaps, too, because remember I said we started in the college market. What that meant was you would collect books in May or June when you guys were leaving for the summer, and then you would sell those books sort of August, September. So at the same time, you have a lot of costs incurred to get the books into your warehouse, process them, and so forth. So we had, in the early years, we had a lot of sort of what I call the cliffhanger moments, where you're just literally on the side of the cliff with your fingernails, just waiting for college to start so you can start sort of converting your inventory into cash and pay your bills. Basically, what we did, when we say bootstrap, that's everything. That's us not taking salaries for a long time. Sitting down with your vendors and saying, hey, I know you want to be paid in 30 days, but this particular period of time, we can only pay you in 90. It's getting banks in early. We were fortunate enough that we have a physical asset, used books. You see them right there. We had a lot of hard work to do to convince a bank that they should bank that inventory. If you can imagine it, I mean, we just can't tell you how many places I got laughed out of. Like, we'd have a hard time even with new books, but you want us to bank used books? But over time, the model began to show itself, and we could actually show a lot of predictability to bankers about, hey, these are college books. I'm telling you, when August hits, they're going to sell, all right? And when January hits, they're going to sell. So fortunately, we got a bank a while back that believed in us and gave us that first line of credit, and kind of helped us grow that way. But it really bootstrapped in every sense of the word to sort of get where we could. Now, but part of what's driving that decision too is we just didn't want to give away equity prematurely. Now, in some cases, again, going back to my first example, you don't have a choice. I mean, if you've got a great idea and you really need to bankroll it, there's no other way. There's no asset. There's nothing but an idea. That's when you're going to turn to angels, friends and family. You're going to get money together any way you can to see your dream come true. In our case, we were fortunate that we had revenue, we had a model, we had inventory, and it was just along the way, bootstrap, get some bank financing. We finally decided last year, in 2008, that we really were in a position where we could raise capital because we really believed our valuation was fair. We had built enough value in the company that when the investors came in and said, okay, I'll give you this amount of money for this % of ownership, we felt that was right. The balance was right at that point. And we also knew that it was time because primarily when I mentioned building out our own brand, we had gotten to that stage where we said, look, if we're serious about building out our own brand and the kind of marketing dollars that we're going to have to invest in that, it was just time. And so, a lot of things kind of came together for it to be the right time, but I think overriding it for us in the first few years was don't give away equity prematurely at too cheap a price. Do everything you can to bootstrap till you get to that point. And fortunately, in our case, it worked.
David, thanks for coming out today.
Yeah, thanks, everybody.